Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andy Weinstein, and I am the CEO of ISS Group. It looks like we have a good turnout today to see our approval routing technology, so I appreciate everybody joining us today. Once again, today we're going to be looking very specifically at our advanced approval routing technology that we call ART. So ART has a number of features to it, but the most important feature is what's highlighted here in red, which is configurable user-defined routing rules based on data within the process form. So we're going to use our iPurchase solution today to demonstrate this. What that means is the end user organization can configure approval routing rules without any programming required based on the data in the form. In this case, we're going to be looking at purchase order requisitions. So the routing rules can be developed based on any of the data in the header or line items of the PO requisition. And an unlimited number of rules can be created. So I'm not going to run through each one of these features right here at the moment. We're going to cover many of these in the actual demonstration today. But the most important one, as I said, is these rules are configurable. So a rule, as an example, would be any purchase order requisition greater than $1,000, the CFO needs to approve. Or any purchase order requisition greater than $1,000 for this cost center, for this plant, and/or the plant manager needs to approve. So the rules can be very simple or they can be very complicated. The rules are defined by the end user organization. As I said earlier, unlimited number of rules can be created. So let's take a look at some software. So I took the liberty of actually creating a purchase order requisition. You'll look at the header information. So here is the supplier, some ship to and bill to information over here, some additional information about the buyer, the originator of the requisition, things like this. So this is header information. Okay, there are other tabs here where notes and attachments can be created, master comments, such as the T's and C's that go on the purchase order, and the approval history. So that's what we're going to focus on today, the approval history. I set up one line item so far. You see this line item here. We can drill down into the line item. You see the line item is for a microscope. That's the item number. This is an MRO item. This item is not stored in the QAD item master file, although the items can be stored in the QAD item master file. And if the item is stored in the QAD item master file, we read the QAD tables in real time and populate the appropriate fields in both the header and the line item. So this is a microscope here. Here's a commodity code, the site, the department, the GL account and sub-account, the project it's going to be charged to, and the price, $25,000. Based on this one line item and the price of $25,000, we have rules set up that have created this approval hierarchy. This requisition has not yet been submitted for approval. So what you're looking at here is an approval simulation. These are the approvers that would need to approve this requisition if it was submitted now. So we set up a rule that says the R&D director has approval limits up to $25,000. This typically would be somebody's name, but we've used the titles here just for demonstration purposes. So this would say Andy Weinstein, R&D director, $25,000. and then senior director. That would be another person. And you'll notice that they're both at the same approval level, because they have the same approval limits. So there is a rule set up that says for any PO requisition, $25,000 or greater, the R&D director and the senior director need to approve the requisition. You also see two other, one is a group and one is the buyer. So we'll talk about them in a few minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a second line item. So I'm simply going to copy the line item, the first line item, to create a second line item. You notice it creates a duplicate copy. And I'm going to go into that line item, and I'm simply going to change it from Microsoft 1 to Microsoft 2. I could have left it as Microsoft 1. I could be buying the same microscope. But I wanted to change it here just for clarification purposes. And I'll save and close. So you notice I have two line items. Now totaling, oh, I needed to put a price in there. The second microscope also needs to be $25,000. And you notice my total requisition now is $50,000. And you'll notice what happened is I have two additional approvers that were added to the approval hierarchy. The vice president and the senior director of clinical operations. So both of those approvers have approval limits up to $50,000. So because the requisition is over $50,000, we have the R&D director, the senior director, the vice president, and the senior director all on the approval hierarchy. This was all determined dynamically based on the rules set up in the system. You'll notice again, we're still simulating. We have still not submitted this requisition for approval. If we submit it now for approval, these are the people that we need to approve. Okay. I'm going to add one more line item here. All right. Adding it in the wrong place. And we're going to make it chemical toxin. Another MRO line item. Okay, and we'll just say it's chemicals is the commodity code here. And again, we'll charge it to the R&D department. Same project. And let's say we're going to buy 5 gallons at $500 each. And we'll save and close it. Okay, so now we have a total requisition of $52,500, but what you noticed is the hazardous operations department has been added to the approval hierarchy. Okay, so there is an approval rule that is recognizing the data. This has nothing to do with the dollar amount. This has to do with the actual data. So there's an approval rule that says if the item is chemical toxin, add the employees of the hazardous department to the approval hierarchy. So again, the rules can be created based on any and all of the data in the requisition, both at the header level and at the line item level. Okay, so that's what's important about that. Let's take a look real quick at those approval rules. So here we are in the admin section of iPurchase. Okay? And this is what we call the simple approval rules maintenance program. So we have two different ways to set up approval rules. We have a simple way and we have a more complicated way. Okay? So what we see here are the different rules. So this is a rule, and this says Robert Y., who happens to be the R&D director. That's his title. So if we went into his user profile, it would show that Robert Y. is the R&D director. And the rule simply says insert Robert Y. at sequence 100 if it's a CapEx type request. Right? It's as simple as that. Okay, so he's inserted no matter what. The next person, Trey, says, and he is the next person on the approval hierarchy. So if we go back to the approval hierarchy, we see Senior Director. So Trey title is Senior Director. And it shows here, again, if the rec type is CapEx and the minimum amount of the requisition is $25,000, add Trey to the approval hierarchy. And again, instead of adding Trey's name, we're simply adding the title at the moment for demonstration purposes. So it's really as simple as that. These fields here, the originator on behalf of, the domain, okay, the rec type, the header site, the line site, the department, the count, these are the most frequently used fields that our clients have used in creating rules. So that is the reason why we created a simple rules maintenance program. What the end user simply needs to do is fill in these fields, an asterisk indicating anything, anybody, okay? So I can have multiple entries in these fields. So I can have CapEx, expense, vacation request. I can have different types of request types. I can have multiple cost centers here. I can have multiple projects. And this is an AND condition. So this would say if the originator is Frank and the domain is XYZ and it's a CapEx request and, insert Trey if this evaluation turns out to be true. Right? So it's a very simple way to create rules. You'll notice Vince here is set up as the Senior Director, as the Senior Director of Clinical Ops. That's who Trey, let's see who Trey is. Here's Trey. Okay, here's Trey, Senior Director. And if we go back to Trey, we notice Trey has a very simple rule. That's the rule that I went through. So let's look at Vince. Okay, so Vince is this guy down here, Senior Director of Clinical Ops. You see username Vince A, title Senior Director of Clinical Ops. Okay. So you'll notice Vince's rule is if the minimum amount is $50,000 and it's a CapEx request, insert Vince at sequence 300, right? Which is exactly what it did. It's 300, right? So here's Vince. And if we go back to Bill H, go to Bill H, you'll see Bill H is the same as Vince. Again, the minimum amount being $50,000, sequence at 300, and the CapEx request, insert Bill H. And Bill H is the Vice President. You'll notice the user ID Bill H. Okay, so both Bill and Vince were inserted because we're now over $50,000. Now, how did the hazardous operations people get inserted? So let's take a look at that. That's not here. You don't see that anywhere in here in these rules. So that was set up in a different set of rules. So this is the more complicated way to set up rules. We set up a rule here called hazardous material rule. So we can take a look at that. And this says insert Andy Weinstein. Right? And if you look at Andy Weinstein, his title would be hazardous operations. So you notice that the user ID is Andy Weinstein. Right? And you'll notice if we go to conditions, the conditions is simply where the line description equals chemical toxin. It's really as simple as that. If we hit this drop down, what you'll see are all the different data fields that are in the header as well as the line item. Any of these data fields can be used to create these conditions, and you can create a very complicated rule using ands and ors. This is a very simple rule, right, where the line description equals chemical toxin, right? But there are, of course, much more complicated rules as well. I don't know if I have an example of something a little more complicated. Here is one with some ors. So this one says if the rec type equals CapEx, or the line cost is less than or equal to 1,000, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's nested ands and ors. You can build this as more complicated as you'd like. Upon submission of the requisition, the rules are checked, and depending on which rules are determined to be true, the approvers here are inserted into the approval hierarchy. So that's how all of these folks. If I delete this line here, you'll notice the hazardous material people came off the hierarchy. Okay, so it's dynamic. It happens automatically. You'll also notice we have a finance group and the buyer. So we have a rule set up, right, called finance group, and I believe that was set up, let's see, in the simple rules. Okay, so I believe it's here. This is the rule, and it's set up at sequence 600. Right? Any amount of the requisition, as long as it's a CapEx request, no matter what the amount of the requisition, add the finance group. In this case, it's called test group, to the approval hierarchy. Okay, so the finance group was added. Now, a group is simply a group of users or members. So Jim Bird, Alex Chen. As I said, these would usually be names of people as well, but we just are showing the titles for the demonstration purposes. Usually it would say something like Jim and Alex and Bill. So what you see here is Jim Bird and Alex Chen are the members of the finance group. Both of them will be notified at the same time. Either one of them can go in and review and approve or reject the requisition. So in this case, both of these folks will be notified at the same time. We call that simultaneous approvals. But these two folks would not be notified until both of these folks approved the requisition. We call that sequential approvals. So we have both simultaneous approvals, we have sequential approvals, and we have group approvals. Okay? We also have something called out of office. So that's what this little sailboat indicates here. So Alex Chen is out of the office. He has assigned Bill Copps as his designee. So not only will Jim and Alex be notified when the finance group is notified, but Bill Copps will also be notified. And Bill can go in on behalf of Alex and review and approve or reject the requisition on behalf of Alex. And last but not least, we have the buyer. So if we go back to our approval, okay, I think it's set up in the regular approval rules. Right? We probably have in here a buyer approval somewhere. I purchase buyer. Okay, so here's the rule. You'll notice that the buyer of the requisition, so this is a special field which indicates that the buyer attached to that supplier is automatically going to be inserted based on these conditions. So the condition in this case is if the requisition is anywhere between 0 and 9999999, so just about any requisition, and I don't believe there's any other rule set up, okay, so, or any other conditions set up. So that means the buyer is going to be inserted at level 900 for every requisition. Most of our clients do that. They want the buyer to eyeball the requisition and approve the requisition prior to the requisition converting to a purchase order. Okay? Based on the security privileges, the people in the approval hierarchy can make changes to the PO requisition. So if the buyer needed to change the vendor, he wanted a buyer from a different vendor, he can go ahead and do that. If the buyer wanted to change the price or the cost center or the project, the buyer can go ahead and do that, assuming the buyer had security privileges to do that. So we're going to go ahead and submit this requisition. Okay. You notice the requisition number was assigned, is now changed the status of the requisition from not submitted to pending. If we go back into the approval history, what you'll notice here, it's not a simulation anymore, but it's the actual approval attempt number 1. Up until the time the requisition is fully approved and the purchase order is created, the originator can retract the requisition and make changes. So I've just retracted the requisition. I can go ahead and make changes to the requisition. So maybe I want that chemical toxin on the requisition. Okay, so let's add it back. Okay, let's make sure all our other fields are what we want them to be, and let's order 1, and let's order 3 this time, gallons. Okay, let's save and close it. So we added 900 to the requisition. Again, if we go back in simulation mode, you notice the hazardous material people were added to the requisition. And if I scroll down, you'll notice that we keep track of all approval attempts. So this was approval attempt number 1, but it was retracted. Okay, and that's what this is saying. It's been retracted, and I'm logged in as Frank Salisi. So Frank Salisi retracted it. I can now resubmit it. And I can go back in pending, I can look at my approval history, and you'll notice, again, my approval attempt has changed now to approval attempt number 2, where the hazardous material people have been notified. They're the first ones on the approval hierarchy. Again, this is sequential, so 50 comes before 100. So once the hazardous operations material approves, it will then move to the next folks, and these folks will be notified. If the hazardous material people reject this requisition, it will never go any further. Okay? And again, if we scroll down, you can see approval attempt number 1 and approval attempt number 2. So we keep track of all approval attempts. You'll notice also up here, we have the ability to add an approver, remove an approver, or emergency approve this requisition. So again, that's based on security privileges. This is not available to everybody, but I'm logged in as Frank, who has full admin rights, so I can add people to the approval hierarchy. I can remove any of the folks that are on this approval hierarchy, or I can force this requisition through the approval cycle. So maybe we don't have time to wait for this to get through the entire approval hierarchy. Maybe it's an emergency. There's a piece of equipment down in the plant. A part needs to be purchased, and we don't have time to wait for Jim Bird or Alex Chen in the finance group to approve it. So we can force this through the approval process a PO, and you'll notice a PO has been created. if we take a look at our approval, what it shows us is that this was forced through. Right? So the first attempt, it was retracted. The second attempt, it was forced through the approval hierarchy to an emergency approval. And we can take a look at our purchase order that we created, and here is our purchase order for microscope 1, microscope 2, and the chemical toxin. Okay, so that pretty much concludes today's demonstration of the Advanced Approval Routing Technology. The Advanced Approval Routing Technology, again, is at the heart of all of ISS Group's solutions. And today we were looking at our iPurchase solution for demonstration purposes. Thank you all for attending. Please feel free to attend next week's demonstration at 12:30 East Coast time on Wednesday. Thank you.